All right, and welcome in everybody. Hope you're having a fantastic, fantabulous, awesome freaking day. My name is Garrett Shumake, and you are listening to the Shumake Take. This is predictions versus reality. The beginning of the offseason program continues with this series. If you know what predictions versus reality is all about, go ahead and you can skip to the timestamp down below where it actually begins. For those of you that do not know, predictions versus reality, I predicted every team's final record before the regular season started back in August. So we're going to look at where I thought they would be and where they actually ended up and reflect on what happened, everything in between, and reflect on what happened, what went right, what went wrong for a number of teams, right? And then we'll break down, the stat leaders, major stat leaders from every major statistical category. You're talking passing yards, rushing yards, receiving yards, right? Tackles, sacks, interceptions. Kind of break down how well these players played throughout the year, and then we'll get into what actually went right, what went wrong with each team, and then ultimately we'll conclude with how they will get better. And this team that we're going to be talking about today, it was one of the most surprising teams in the NFL this season, and that was the Minnesota Vikings. One of the most shocking years for a team I think I have ever seen. So the Minnesota Vikings, I had them going 6-11. I had them going 6-11, and they finished with a record of 14-3, second place in the NFC North, the only 14-win wildcard team in NFL history. They were a really, really good football team. Their three best wins, in my opinion, throughout the year was against Houston, 34-7 early in the year, versus Atlanta, 42-21. They're at midway through the year, and then week 1 against the New York Giants, 28-6. They didn't have that many good wins though. A lot of their wins were one score. They were ugly, especially against teams that aren't that good. Compared to the Minnesota Vikings, they allowed a lot of bad teams to hang around in there. There was a lot, and like I mentioned, there's a lot of wins that weren't very particularly dominant or very good. I mean, I guess there's no way to gauge if a win is good or bad. Win's a win, but compared to some of these other teams that we'll talk about as this series continues, there really wasn't that many really good wins for the Minnesota Vikings compared to other teams that finished with similar records. So continuing on, their offense overall finished 12th in the NFL, a little bit lower than I thought that it would actually be when I was writing the script, but their offense was still very, very good nonetheless, and their defensive rank finished 16th. Well, this one, I thought the number really didn't give how good this defense was. It didn't give them any justice. This defense was a lot better than the 16th ranked that they received. By the way, these numbers are from Pro Football Focus. No, they're from Fox NFL. Yeah, Fox NFL and their defensive rankings. That's where I got those numbers from. Either way, besides that, let's go into the stat leaders, I should say. Excuse me. Let's actually go into the stat leaders for this Minnesota Vikings team. Starting with the passing department, Sam Darnold had to start. J.J. McCarthy, I can't remember if he was picked 9th, 10th, or 11th overall, but rookie quarterback out of Michigan, had just won a national championship. People were doubting if he was going to be the guy or not. He was slated to be the starter, and then in the first preseason game he played in, he got hurt and was done for the year, forcing Sam Darnold to step in. And I think a lot of people were very disappointed. They said the Vikings are done. They are not going to win anything this year. Without a good quarterback, they will fail. Well, Sam Darnold shut all those people up, including myself. 66% completion percentage, 4,319 yards, which was 5th in the NFL. 35 passing touchdowns was also 5th in the NFL. 12 interceptions. Sam Darnold, simply put, was phenomenal. He was one of the big things that went right for this team. And ironically enough, he was one of the biggest reasons, or the biggest reason, I said the Vikings would finish 6-11, because we remember his time with the New York Jets. It was terrible. It was awful. The Jets ruined him. Then he goes in Francisco to back up at the time, Trey Lance and then Brock Purdy. Then he played in a couple of games, looked pretty good, but some people were like, well, it's because he's playing in a Kyle Shanahan offense, right? Kyle Shanahan's this great genius offensive mind, right? And so when people, when Sam Darnold was slated to start for the Minnesota Vikings after J.J. McCarthy went down, people were like, uh-oh, the Vikings are in for a lot of trouble. And like I mentioned, Sam Darnold absolutely shut everybody up. And the big takeaway here from this performance from Sam Darnold was this is what a good situation does for a player. Even if you started off really bad, like with the New York Jets, and you have all these years to just sit, learn, develop, and grow, and then you get to an organization with great coaches, great teammates, all of them believe in you, right? And you finally get a veteran guy that can finally show the world what he can really do. And the version of Sam Darnold that we got in 2024 was what the Jets were what the Jets thought they were going to get, and they never got. And it wasn't just that he played well. He elevated this team in ways that I did not expect at all. And quite frankly, if I'm being honest, it did not feel like a mid-quarterback carried by a great team. It did not feel like that. There was points this year where this offense was struggling or this defense was not playing up to par, and Sam Darnold was able to deliver when it mattered most and almost in a way put the team on his back. I still remember the win in week 16 or week 17 where he enters the locker room and everyone just starts celebrating, spraying champagne. I think it was when they clinched a playoff berth, I think. Maybe it was. I do not remember. But it was one of the last few games of the year. He walks in, they're celebrating, they picked him up, right? They were all celebrating with him. And that right there is such a heartwarming moment. For a guy that was treated like garbage with the New York Jets, got thrown away for nothing, then goes to San Francisco and is a backup for Trey Lance and Brock Purdy, and then he finally gets his shot again with the Minnesota Vikings and absolutely made the most of it. And honestly, looking into his year, going into our next point, he's one of the big players that are highlighting a growing critical issue with the pro game in the NFL, and then there's no patience to properly develop a quarterback. As I mentioned, the guy flunked out in New York, right? Goes to San Francisco to be the backup, and then he touched the field in week 1 and never looked back. You can make a whole video talking about Sam Darnold. I know a lot of people are going to, but there's no doubting that he was one of the best parts of this Vikings team. And to see the once third overall pick that busted out and was written off prove that he has true value, a role, and a place in the NFL, that's fantastic. And with the development of quarterbacks, you look at guys like Baker Mayfield, you look at Sam Darnold, right? I'm trying to think some other quarterbacks that are in that situation, right? Geno Smith, another big one, right? He was also a former New York Jets quarterback that also flunked out and bounced around the league for a little bit. So the NFL now, like obviously it's a quarterback-driven league, and you need to get your quarterback of the future. We need a great QB to win a Super Bowl, blah, 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 blah. But the thing is, no one is taking the time to develop these guys properly. I mentioned it. I think it was either the Packers' predictions versus reality or the Bears' predictions versus reality. But quarterbacks now need to sit. They need to sit, in my opinion, a minimum of 2 years, and they need time to adjust. To adjust to the NFL, to adjust to the pro game and all of its, different nuances. It's a whole different game compared to college. Even more now than it was back then when guys like Sam Darnold, Baker Mayfield, and Geno Smith were coming out of college, almost, 7, 8, 9, 10 plus years ago, right? So it's even that much more of a bigger critical issue now. And seeing a guy like Sam Darnold play so well in year 6, year 7, right, compared to how bad he was early in his career, it goes to show that quarterbacks, playing quarterback in the NFL and to be successful at it, most of the time, it's going to take multiple years. It's going to take time. Look at a guy like Lamar Jackson, for example. Lamar Jackson, rookie year, started a few games, started in that playoff game, looked horrible, And then 2019, year 2, pops off, wins MVP, right? And then year 3, year 4, plays well. Year 5, year 6, he's playing well. But every year, Lamar Jackson has been in the NFL since 2020. I'll say since 2020. 2019 was a great year, but 2020 was really where development truly, you could see development begin to, really, I don't know how to say it. You really begin to see the development of Lamar Jackson, but you look at year-to-year growth and development, and you look at his tape, right? If you really look at the tape, you'll see it. Lamar Jackson, it took him a lot of time for him to grow into the player that he is, to now he is in his prime and playing the best football he's ever played. And, so many teams now draft a quarterback high, start them too early, and expect them to bring immediate results when that's simply not the rule. That's an exception. Guys like Jaden Daniels and CJ Stroud, those are exceptions to the rule. It's a very, very interesting situation that I've talked about for way too long at this point. We got to continue on. We are wasting time here. We've completely gone off track with the Minnesota Vikings. I kind of went on a ramble there. But getting back to it, the leading rusher for the Minnesota Vikings was Aaron Jones. 255 carries, 1,138 yards, 5 touchdowns, 4.5 yards per carry. And he also added on in the receiving game 51 catches for 408 yards and 2 touchdowns. Aaron Jones had a pretty good year. He had a really good year. After he had some injuries in Green Bay, they let him go and become a free agent. And some people thought, this might be a questionable move by Green Bay. And he goes to Minnesota. Opening press conference, mentions how upset he is that Green Bay didn't bring him back and how much he wanted to make them pay for it. And he went out there and proved that he can still be a good running back in the NFL. And they needed that. The Vikings really needed that. One of the biggest issues with their team last year was the running game. So to get a guy that can come in here and just produce for you, that's what you want. Now, Aaron Jones is getting older, and he had some games in there where he kind of showed some age. So there will be a need for a younger running back in the future. But we'll talk more about that near at the end. Receiving wise, Justin Jefferson, of course, was the team's leading receiver. 103 catches, 6 in the NFL, 1,533 yards, which was second only behind his college teammate Jamar Chase, and then 10 touchdowns, which was 6th in the NFL. Justin Jefferson continues to be the best receiver in football right now, and even with Sam Darnold, with Kirk Cousins, no matter who is at quarterback, Justin Jefferson is going to produce. Fantastic year for the wide receiver. Jordan Addison, he had 63 catches, 875 yards, 9 touchdowns. Another solid year for the young receiver, the former first-round pick out of USC. He has become a very solid wide receiver, too, for the Minnesota Vikings. Plays well, plays consistent, very reliable. Not much you can say past that, not in a bad way. It's just that is who he is. He is solid, he is reliable, and that's what you want out of a wide receiver, too. You can have your wide receiver 1 be all the razzle-dazzle, all the explosion, whatnot, but then you get a wide receiver 2 that's super talented, that's very reliable, right? Someone you can depend on. That's what you're looking for out of a wide receiver 2, and Jordan Addison fit that mold exactly this year. TJ Hawkinson was the third guy on the list. 41 catches, 455 yards, 0 touchdowns. A little bit of a down year for TJ Hawkinson, considered one of the best tight ends in the NFL. Definitely did not do as well compared to previous years, but I think a lot of that had to do with this offense kind of switching schemes, scheme switching a little bit and focusing a little bit more on the run game as they've compared to in years past. So this allowed for, more heavy play action. It allowed for, eventually, the touches had to go to someone else, right? And in the grand scheme of it, a few more touches went to Aaron Jones and a few went away from TJ Hawkinson. But TJ Hawkinson, when he was on the field, you could tell that he was still a big threat. He was covered a lot as well. He still demanded a lot of attention from defenses. So that is also something else to note. And, maybe it was a down year, but his impact on the field, when you look on the tape, was still felt. And then the fourth guy, Jalen Naylor, the slot receiver that they have, 28 catches, 414 yards, 6 touchdowns, clean, productive, nothing too great, but as a slot receiver, when you have Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson, then you had Aaron Jones, who had 51 catches. I mean, there's only a limited amount of touches that can go around. Kind of the same point for TJ Hawkinson, and not very many went to Jalen Naylor. But at certain points, he was reliable, and he did, made big plays for this Minnesota Vikings offense when no one else really was at very few points. But for what he needed to do, I thought he did a very, very good job. Then we get into tackles. Blake Cashman was the leader with 112. He had a great year, in my opinion. Locked down that linebacker spot. 4.5 sacks, 8 tackles for loss, 8 pass deflections. Very good overall linebacker, right? He was good in run defense. He was good in pass coverage. And as one of the leaders of that defense, that's exactly what you want. And then you get safety Josh Metellus, who finished with 103. And then safeties Cameron Bynum and Harrison Phillips finished right behind him. This safety group was played really well for the Minnesota Vikings, and it helped them a lot in the secondary, where their secondary had some issues, right? Especially at the cornerback position, Shaquille Griffin is like your average starter, and Stephon Gilmore's a veteran, right? But overall, those safeties played really, really well, and their numbers showed for that. And then sack-wise, Jonathan Grenard, he had 12.5 sacks, 18 tackles for loss. 18! Absolutely nuts. Jonathan Grenard was one of the few free agent moves that they made that were kind of like a big splash. And he hit. He absolutely hit. He had 12.5 sacks last year with the Houston Texans. Comes here to the Minnesota Vikings. I think he has a relationship with Brian Flores there as well. No, he doesn't. Andrew Van Ginkel, who we're going to talk about in a second, does. But Jonathan Grenard had another great year. Very good pass rusher, and they needed help in the pass rush department at edge rusher. That was one of their biggest needs going into this year. They go get that guy, and he immediately turned it around and delivered. And then Andrew Van Ginkel, right next to him, 11.5 sacks, also had 18 tackles for loss. He was the guy I mentioned with the relationship with Brian Flores. Brian Flores was the head coach for the Miami Dolphins for a couple years. Andrew Van Ginkel was there. And so he had a career year, absolutely played out of his mind. And then you get linebackers, Pac Jones, who finished with 7, and then the aforementioned Blake Cashman, who finished with 4.5. Really reflects how great this defensive line was. While the secondary, they weren't particularly great at certain points in the year, this defensive line made up for it in a big way. They were mean. They were nasty. They were near the top of the NFL in sacks. They were the best run defending team in the NFL. I'm pretty sure, if not, they were one of the best. This defensive line was so dominant in 2024 that they were feared. They were legitimately feared. They were really hard to stop. The edge rush duo of Grenard and Van Ginkel absolutely turned this team around. And it's just wow. Like the defensive line was one of the brightest spots of this football team. And then you get into the interceptions. Byron Murphy had 6, continues to be a very good corner for them. I remember a couple years ago they got him from Arizona, and he has been a great player for them ever since. And then the aforementioned Harrison Smith and Cameron Bynum both finished with 3. So they were pretty good. Another thing they were really good at was getting turnovers. They got a turnover in every game they played in the regular season. Every single game. And while, like I mentioned, their secondary numbers were not that great, I think they were the best. They led the NFL in takeaways this year. So they were incredible at turning the ball over. And a lot of that has to do with a dominant defensive line that's so disruptive that it forces quarterbacks to make mistakes. So those two things go hand in hand, and guess what? It made them a very, very good defense, one of the best defenses in the NFL. And why did I have this team going 6-11 in the first place? After everything that went right for them, why did they have them going 6-11? Well, first off, I mentioned Sam Darnold already, but going back into it, I was unsure about if this defense would really improve or how much they would improve. But what had happened was they improved. They improved in a big way, made moves where they had holes and major needs, and it paid off big time. But the third thing was I expected Green Bay and Detroit to be good, and I also expected Chicago to be competitive. And if you go back and look at that video, the NFC schedule predictions video where I talked about the NFC North, I said, this season's not going to, for the NFC North, is not going to be about the team that's going to finish first. It's going to be about the team that's going to finish last. And, one team is unfortunately going to be left out. All of them at the time were thought, people thought that they were going to be good, but then the Vikings, they went down, right? J.J. McCarthy went down, and so Sam Darnold had to step in. And that was ultimately the deciding factor for me, was that was the worst quarterback situation in the division, and that's why I had them finishing last. But of course, that is not what happened. I mentioned Sam Darnold as one of the things that went right. I mentioned how good the defense was, especially on the defensive line, but you also got to mention the free agency as a whole. I mentioned Sam Darnold, Aaron Jones, Jonathan Grenard, Andrew Van Ginkel, but also they had a bunch of other signings that were big contributors for this football team. I mean, they got a lot out of all the players just about that they brought in. Even guys that didn't really play, they provided solid depth. And that was never really a concern for me for a majority of this roster throughout the year, as players got banged up here and there, and there was not a significant dip in production from really any spot. So that's a testament to this front office for putting this team together and really, attacking where they really needed to get better. And then you can't really ask for anything better than that. And you also have to give props to the coaching staff as well for the season that they had. They exceeded expectations by far. And when you look at what Kevin O'Connell has done with the quarterbacks that he's worked with, right, and then assembling this coaching staff and then going back to the front office and what they've been able to do, you look at a situation that many different people want to be a part of, whether you're a coach, a player, someone who's in the front office, maybe you're looking for a promotion, for example, if you're the owner of the Vikings, and most of all, if you're a fan, right? Knowing that your organization is good, but not just good, one that you look at as a standard, that's a great feeling. That's a great feeling because for the people that are there, right, the situation, you're in a good situation, it makes your job that much easier. And then you look at, coaches and players and whatnot that are that are looking at Minnesota as a destination, it looks that much more enticing because this is a winning team. This is a winning organization with great coaches, a great front office that really cares about doing what needs to be done to get this team better. And it's a phenomenal feeling. It's a phenomenal feeling. And for Minnesota Vikings fans, even though the year ended in a weird way, which we'll talk about in a moment, you can't not be happy about where this Minnesota Vikings team is. They are so talented. They have such good stuff everywhere from top to bottom. There is really no fatal flaw with this team. There is really no fatal flaw at all. And going back to the loss against the Rams in the wild card round, that was sad. It did show that despite the team was great and really great from top to bottom, they do still have some work to do. They also benefited from an easy schedule, which is something I didn't mention at the beginning, but they had one of the easiest schedules in the NFL, so there is that going for them. And I also mentioned that they didn't have a lot of solid to great wins. So that being said, this offseason coming up is going to be one of the biggest ones in franchise history because we're going to see in 2025 if the Vikings are legit, which I'm more inclined to believe that they are. I'm leaning on that side. Or was this a fluke? And to make sure that this year, that 2025 is legit, the quarterback situation has to be correct. It's the biggest question mark for the Minnesota Vikings. Sam Darnold is probably going to be out. I expect him to get a big payday. J.J. McCarthy will be coming off an injury, finally playing for the first time, being the starter. And one thing that the Vikings prove this year, or continue to prove with this growing narrative in the NFL, is that you can have a veteran QB that will win you many games, but probably will not take you to the promised land, will not take you to the Super Bowl. A young quarterback can, but that's not to say that J.J. McCarthy going into next year, will be probably the biggest wild card in the entire NFL, because having a bad quarterback means will make nothing else matter. If a bad quarterback play will ruin a great football team. Likewise, if J.J. McCarthy is good, there's a real chance that this Vikings team goes over the top, right? So getting J.J. McCarthy in a position to succeed will be paramount for the Minnesota Vikings. He's the biggest wild card going into the year for this team. But also, offensively, I would like to see them add some depth at wide receiver. While their backups, they didn't have a lot to do, right? Because all the receivers stayed healthy for the most part. So we didn't really see them. So it's hard to tell if they really need depth or not. But I wouldn't mind drafting a guy on day 3 or bringing in like a veteran receiver here on a cheap contract, right? It doesn't hurt to continue to build the back end of your receiving core. Considering that is, that is your focal point of your offense, that makes a lot of sense to do. And I mentioned it before, you need a backup running back. I don't know if Cam Akers is going to be the running back too. I know that he's a free agent. I would probably bring him back because he is still a decent player. But if I'm the Minnesota Vikings, I might go as far as to draft a running back with your second round pick. I mean, that's entirely possible if there's a guy up there that you really like. But there's many different players that you could go with, depending on like what the Minnesota Vikings want to do. I would kind of like them to draft a back similar to Aaron Jones, that he can run. He's a patient runner, can catch out of the backfield, right? Has some speed to him. If you can get like a younger version of Aaron Jones, I think that would be really nice because it will allow him to sit and develop, right? While Aaron Jones takes the bulk of the snaps, and then when he leaves, you have a guy that can play his role and take his place. So there is also that. And then defensively, I do expect this secondary to get some work. In my opinion, I'm going to have the Vikings. I'm going to do a mock draft, like first round mock draft before the NFL draft starts, in April. So keep an eye out for that, I guess. It's a couple of months away. But anyways, I think the Vikings are going to have to draft corner in the first round and pair a guy to go with Byron Murphy. Because Shaquille Griffin, Stephon Gilmore are both free agents. They had their struggles last year as veteran guys. So getting a young guy to pair up with Byron Murphy, and you add the young safeties and the veteran and Harrison Smith that is there, and you can have a secondary that can go from good to great. Excuse me. Throat's dry. Excuse me. Sorry. Throat's really dry. Oh, man. But anyways, another thing too is I would also continue by drafting a defensive tackle. Maybe in the third round, or an edge rusher. Maybe you go edge rusher with your second round pick, because the Vikings do have veterans on their defensive line, right? Especially at the defensive tackle spot. So if you just get another young edge rusher to add depth and develop, same thing for defensive tackle, by the time that these veterans their contracts are expired and they're ready to go do bigger and better things, you have guys that are developed and that are ready to play. The best teams in the NFL, they continuously win because they know how to build through the trenches. And even though they don't always pick, defensive tackle or edge rusher, nose tackle with their first, second round pick, or even a top 100 pick, a lot of these guys, you draft them in the 4th round, you could draft them in the 5th round, and they become solid backup role players for you at minimum, right? If you have a good development program. So getting these guys in here and picking them where we have high value, it's a good spot. It would be a really good spot for them to continue to build depth at that position, to continue the long-term success that this defensive line, or to continue the success the defensive line had in 2024 and have it extend into 2025 and beyond. But also, it's important for these two things. But on defense, it's especially important because with the new quarterback stepping in, J.J. McCarthy, this defense is going to have to play great from front to back. This defensive line is going to continue to have to be dominant. The linebackers are still going to have to be able to fly around, make plays in the run against the pass, and the secondary is simply going to have to get a little bit better. I know that they got a lot of turnovers, which is all fine and dandy, but a lot of that was because teams took their shots and felt like they could have a chance against these receivers. Having a lot of turnovers doesn't necessarily indicate that your secondary was very good, right? It can also be an indicator that, yeah, you guys got picked on a lot because some big plays went over your head from time to time. And sometimes you were able to adjust and get away with an interception here, right? You were able to make a play on it. But I really want to see Byron Murphy and a corner in the first round go out there and really just try and lock people down. Because if you lock people down, this defensive line is going to get so much better. If this secondary can make a jump and improve even more, this defensive line is going to make a jump with them. And we could be seeing an even more ferocious defensive line than we saw this year. And if that's the case, with the quarterback situation, if it goes right, we could really be looking at the Minnesota Vikings being a true Super Bowl contender and being in that conversation for real once again. And that, my friends, will do it for me today with this predictions versus reality. Make sure you guys let me know your thoughts in the comments down below about where I thought this team would be, where they actually ended up. Let me know what you agree with, what you disagree with, or if you want to comment down and say hello, I will say hello back to you. Also, make sure you guys hit the like button and the subscribe button. Hitting those two buttons takes only a couple of seconds, but it means the world to me in helping me grow this platform and continue to share my passion for football in the NFL with more and more people on the platform. So doing that would help me a lot, and I would greatly appreciate it. And also, if you guys could, share the video, whether you're sharing it on social media or you're spreading it by word of mouth. Getting everybody locked in and locked on to the Shumake Take podcast, coming out with great content for you guys every single week. Hope you guys have enjoyed. Stay tuned for predictions versus realities continue as we finish with the NFC North with the Detroit Lions here soon. I will see you guys next time.